sounds of morning blend with the rising sun. The land lies green and cool. Pisgah National Forest, near Asheville, North Carolina. Late in the 1800s, George Vanderbilt came to a forest where he was destined to leave his mark, and thus set the pace for forests everywhere throughout the country. Vanderbilt deeply felt its beauty and made a decision to build his home high upon a hill that overlooked the splendor of the woods. To realize his American dream, Vanderbilt approached the best architect of the time, Richard Morris Hunt, who gladly accepted his new challenge. And the challenge was named Biltmore. Even the humble mountaineers were impressed by its grandeur. Now, to create the ideal setting for the estate, another famous man came to Biltmore, Frederick Law Olmsted, landscape architect, whose reputation as a designer of parks stretched from Boston to New York. They walked together, these two men, and together they planned the future of Biltmore, its 7,000 acres, two men on a threshold. What they were about to do with this parcel of land would deeply influence the fate of all forested land, east to west, border to border. Vanderbilt wanted formal gardens, and while Olmsted was busy planning them, he found disgrace among the woods, disease, damage, carelessness. If a forest is to be healthy, it needs the wisdom of a seasoned forester, a forest manager. Olmsted knew of just the man for the job and recommended him to Vanderbilt, a man trained abroad with a degree in forestry. Gifford Pinchot. Back home in the United States, Pinchot had traveled through forest after forest. Everywhere he looked, his eyes bore witness to the very trouble besieging Biltmore. The trouble was man. Man and the sharp-honed axe. They created mindless deeds that devastated the green mountains of New England, ripped into the valleys of the plush Smokies, stripped the timberlands of the Great Lakes, the Great Divide.
Come on, Red. Get up, brother.
And man was mindless when he just stood by and watched rain and thaw carve deep, dark scars into the young forests he inherited. Forests like Biltmore. In the springtime of 1892, Pinchot came to Biltmore. Nowhere else in America had he seen so many kinds of trees living on common ground. For here on the slopes, northern forests met and mingled with southern forests. White pine, yellow poplar, red oak, cherry, walnut, hickory, and beech, the hemlock, even the well-remembered chestnut. But Pinchot was disturbed.
The woodlands are being stripped of their soul. I'm not here to stay the axe, but to modify it, regulate its use. Here is where I shall begin.
And as Pinchot rode alone, it came back to him, a thought from his school days.
When the country was covered with woods and swamps with brush, the rain that fell was detained by these interruptions. But now the country is cleared. The rain, as fast as it falls, is hurried into the rivers, and in its rush it washes away the earth and soil of our naked fields.
Timber!
During the days that worried Pinchot, reckless removal of trees was common practice.
As I walk among the sad evidence, I wonder if only the young trees could be saved. Cut down the big ones in a way so deft as to do the least harm. No harm at all, if possible. How can I convince these people to plan for tomorrow with a system of logging as yet untried in this country?
First man to convince was the foreman. It wasn't easy. He, in turn, drilled the idea into other foremen. It was easier for him. He used language these rugged men of the mountains understood. Time, perseverance, innovation. A new dawn came to Biltmore Forest. Trees could be cut and removed with little damage to soil, water, and to the young trees that belong to tomorrow's harvest. A forester rarely sees his own achievement within his lifetime. 80 years will pass before this young tree reaches maturity. All it asks of man is time and care. Vanderbilt's Folly. That's what local residents called the Biltmore project. Folly? Hardly. Through the sale of timber, railroad ties, and firewood, Pinchot's work returned a tidy profit. The plan was solid. So solid that by the spring of 1894, Vanderbilt asked Pinchot to look over a tract of 100,000 more acres.
To say that I am delighted with the whole area is to put it mildly. By all means, I said, by all means, purchase the land.
And so, early in 1895, George Vanderbilt acquired the great tract of land and called it Pisgah Forest. Included in the sweep of land lay a valley of infinite beauty, the Pink Beds, so called by early pioneers in tribute to its vivid springtime bloom. Pisgah Forest, land of green, land of enchantment. But Pinchot and his ideas were needed elsewhere. This law of the forest must be spread the country over. In 1898, President Teddy Roosevelt appointed Pinchot chief of the Forestry Division. later to become the United States Forest Service, where he served for 12 years with distinction. But before he could even think of accepting the assignment, Pinchot had a duty.
I cannot leave Pisgah, this cradle of the future, without finding someone to carry on my work.
A telegram to Dr. Carl Alvin Schenck. Are you willing to come to America and to take charge of my forestry interests in western North Carolina? Signed, George W. Vanderbilt. Schenck's answer, yes. And he brought along with him a Ph.D. from Germany's University of Gießen, a degree in forestry, something virtually unknown in America. A young German forester with little knowledge of the United States, its forests, its people, its language, its customs, and its economy, was confronted with a greater challenge than ever. A challenge he met with typical Prussian determination.
In order to log the land, it is roads we need. These misshapen trees must go to give new shoots a chance. Plant with care the new seedlings. Not so close, they need room to grow. Erosion is stripping this hillside. Build wicker fences to slow the rains. Give our forest a chance.
And so began a new era of forestry in America. The young German acquired a following of apprentices, and they wanted to know more.
Hey, Dr. King! Whoa. King, how come you cut this big tree over here on the left and leave this one over here on the right? How long would it take this sapling to make a saw log?
How much timber could you get out of here per acre?
What do you mean by forestry anyway?
To answer such ambitious questions, no forestry school had yet existed in this country. So Schenck accepted the challenge to start one. An old schoolhouse in the Pink Beds would do fine as a classroom. And since most of the mountaineers had sold their land to Vanderbilt, their deserted cabins were used as student quarters. In 1898, the first students were enrolled, and thus the first forestry school ever to be established in America opened its doors, even to late arrivers.
Perhaps now we can begin, gentlemen. Even nature knows the meaning of time. Very well then. Our days will be divided between the classroom and the studies in the forest. In Germany,
At his School of Forestry, Schenck lectured his students every morning. His lessons were flavored with salty witticisms, peppered by a strong Prussian accent.
Specific number and specific species of plants.
There were no American textbooks for such a school, so Schenck turned up the midnight oil and wrote his own. They were good books.
For each area that we work in. Enough from the book. Let us retire to the practical classroom.
Okay, Dad. Oh, man. Come here. Oh, man. Get over. Get over, man.
I am mighty proud of my boys. They have taught me too. Not from the books, but from their hearts. And they have become part of my family.
And through his boys, Dr. Carl Alvin Schenk has become part of America. And he remains so. Part of its people. Part of its customs. Some of which the boys also enjoyed, like the Sangerfest.
Finest, finest Ponderosa. Finest, finest Ponderosa. Finest, finest Ponderosa. In Shanks' forest ears. We're the boys that know some things about the lovely trees. We often search for seedlings down upon our hands and knees. We are always hungry and our thirst we ought to feed in Shanks' forest ears.
Such was the Pisgah of yesterday. Pisgah, Cradle of Forestry. Since those infant days, great strides continue to be made in American forestry. But the spirit of Pinchot and Schenk remains. Just as they adapted to their time, so must we to ours. In the seedlings of today, cared for by our growing wisdom, lies the growing forest of tomorrow.